Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alan. I appreciate it. Alan, you're a dear friend and a great leader here in the RJC. It's great to be back here with you. I was here with you 4 years ago. And I remind you one of the things I said 4 years ago, but wasn't that big of an issue 4 years ago. And that is Commander-in-Chief is not an entry-level position. You had a lot of wonderful people come up on this stage, but very few of them, very, very few of them, have the national security experience that's necessary to take on the responsibility that's confronting this country today. We are at the beginning, and maybe, well, I suspect we're still at the beginning of World War III. I was in Israel not too long ago, and I remember speaking to someone whose name you would know, who's a very close advisor to the Prime Minister, who reminded me a year ago, he said, "Tell the people of the United States that we need to elect a wartime president because we will be at war." And that means someone that has the experience and knowledge, but also someone that our allies know and our enemies fear. I don't know if you know this, but several months ago, I was listed in ISIS magazine. I was in ISIS magazine under the headline, "In the Words of Our Enemy." And it was my picture, and it was a quote from me defining who they are and saying why they must be defeated. No other presidential candidate on either party is on the list of ISIS enemies. They know who I am, and I know who they are. That's because I have been fighting radical Islam before it was fashionable to fight radical Islam. Alan mentioned my work on the Armed Services Committee, where I worked with Joe Lieberman, trying to transform our military from a Cold War force to one that was going to deal with, we called it at the time, asymmetric threats, now called terrorism. After the events of 9/11, I realized that while the president is a great man, President Bush is a great man, and he was fighting valiantly, wasn't telling the whole story about the nature of our enemy. And so I dove deep into understanding Islam, not just today, but history, and understanding what we were dealing with. And it became very, very clear to me what we were dealing with. So I got engaged. I authored the Syrian Accountability Act. And yes, President Bush did not support it initially. But I continued to push to contain Assad, who was influencing Lebanon and threatening the northern border of Israel. I provided leadership on that and pounded away at the president to support this bill. Eventually, we did pass that bill, and Colin Powell said it was the principal reason that Syria got out of Lebanon. We acted and led against a virulent enemy. After that, I authored another bill called the Iran Freedom and Support Act. Why? Because in doing my homework, I realized the principal threat in the region is the one that started it back in 1979, and that is Iran. It started this explosion of radical Islam, but this from a very unique perspective, from a Shiite perspective, something we had not seen in world history. We had not seen a Shia caliphate, an ascendancy of the Shia faith. And that was even more concerning to me. So when I learned through intelligence, and by the way, you probably saw in today's paper, the IAEA said that Iran has been working on a nuclear weapon all the way back to 2003. Back in 2003, I crafted and introduced in 2004 a bill to constrain Iran's nuclear program at a time when our intelligence community publicly was saying it didn't exist. But I fought through otherwise. I pushed a bill and was opposed, unfortunately, by members of both sides of the aisle. But I said the most important issue that we're going to be dealing with is to deal with apocalyptic Islam. Islam that is unlike anything we've dealt with Sunni caliphates in the past. A caliphate that is determined to bring about the end of times, apocalyptic, in order to fulfill their destiny as a faith. If your destiny as a faith is to bring about the apocalypse, the end of the world, a global conflagration, why would you even consider the opportunity or the possibility of giving such a country a nuclear weapon? But ladies and gentlemen, we don't have this discussion because we don't have leaders in this country who are willing to tell the truth to the American public. I gave a speech in 2006 to the National Press Club saying something that every presidential candidate now says is a matter of rote, and that is that we have to define the enemy. We have to define I did that 9 years ago when I was up for re-election in a tough state, and I didn't care because I saw the threat of Iran, a nuclear Iran. I brought to the floor of the Senate my bill in a form of amendment to the authorization bill and tried to pass that sanctions bill. And I was opposed, unfortunately, by Secretary Rice and by the President. Joe Biden read a letter on the floor of the Senate that morning of the vote. I fought, and we came 4 votes short. And you want to know 4 of the votes? Biden, Obama, Kerry, Clinton. They voted against tough sanctions on Iran. 6 months later, we passed it, but it was watered down. Those, ladies and gentlemen, were the sanctions that brought Iran to the table for negotiations under this president, who quickly turned the tables on himself to concede every point to the Iranians and now put them on a path to a nuclear weapon. The Iranians know who I am. I have been out talking about not allowing Iran to have a nuclear weapon for 10 years. They know day one when I say the agreement that is an agreement between the president and several other countries, not this country and several other countries. When I say that that agreement will be null and void and that we will have a policy that Iran will open up all of their facilities to inspections by the United States and no one else, all of them, military, nuclear, all of them. And if they do not do so and begin the process of dismantling, I will do what is necessary to stop a third world war. I will destroy those facilities. Now, people will say, you're starting a war, and I would just emphasize, no, ladies and gentlemen, by doing that, I will stop a war just as much as Israel stopped the development of nuclear weapons in 2 other countries. It didn't start a war. It stopped a rogue nation from having nuclear weapons, which would start a war. So you're looking at someone who on armed services, who in the United States Senate, and afterwards at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, fought and talked about the threat of radical Islam. And now we have a caliphate, another one, this time a Sunni caliphate, the first time in 90 years, that has identified me as an enemy. Why? Because I've had the courage to go out and say what is necessary to defeat them. We have a president who uses the term ISIL and doesn't realize the meaning of is. Think about that for a minute. There have been other Democratic presidents who had that problem. Is in ISIL means Islamic State. And we treat them neither as Islamic or a state. Ladies and gentlemen, you elect me president of the United States. You elect someone that ISIS knows means business. We will do what is necessary to defeat them. Why? Because they are a caliphate, and the reason we have the incidents in France and the incidents in this country, even as of yesterday, is because we have a caliphate that has gained legitimacy because of our policies. Because the United States has practiced a policy, you heard it the day before the Paris attacks, a policy of containment. A policy of containment for a caliphate is music to their ears. Why? Because in Islamic law, one of the central validators of a legitimate caliphate is the maintenance of your territory. And so the president is actually helping by having a policy of containment in order to create disrepute within the Islamic world of this new caliphate. It is essential that we take their land. And ladies and gentlemen, I will put the forces necessary. They want to bring back a 7th century caliphate. I will oblige them by loading up our bombers and bombing them back to the 7th century. We will take their land. We will arm the Kurds. We will work not with Iran, not with Syria, not with Russia, not with the Shiite militias, not with the Quds Force. We will work with Sunni Muslims in Iraq to take back Sunni ground. We have to understand, whether we like it or not, we are in a holy war, and we better act like we know what we're doing. So I encourage each and every one of you. You have a very tough decision to make. There are a lot of really good, qualified candidates. But I can tell you, out there on the road, the issue that is the issue is the issue of national security. And we're going to be going up against a former Secretary of State, and you may say, well, she has a terrible record, but she has experience. And as we've seen from prior debates against folks skilled in national security, if the extent of the national security experience of our candidate is a briefing book, then I do not think that bodes well for us in the fall election. America is on edge. They want someone who is knowledgeable, someone who's experienced, and someone who can contrast with Hillary Clinton on who has the right vision, who's had the right vision for this country over the long term. That is what I bring to the table. I bring to the table experience, knowledge, and proposals that will keep this country safe at a time when that is the preeminent issue before us. One final issue that on national security is the issue of refugees. The issue of immigration and refugees is as hot and button issue as there is out there. It may be as hot as national security because they are very much intertwined. I have taken the position that we should admit no Syrian refugees. And unlike some candidates, I have not taken it recently. I've taken that position from the very beginning of this crisis. Yes, I was concerned about those refugees causing problems here in America. And I don't apologize for the fact that we should not take any more refugees. I don't know if you know this, but over the last 7 years of the Obama administration, this country has resettled 70% of the world's refugees in America. 70%. We have nothing to apologize for. We have done our part. It is now time for the world to do its part, but for a second reason, not just to protect us from potential harm from those refugees. But the reality is, if you listen to the clerics and the leaders in that area of the world, they will tell you that they don't want their people to come to America. They don't want their people to go to Europe. They want them to stay in the region so they can return. The Christian villages can return. The ethnic minorities can return. If we drive out all the people who are moderate Muslims who oppose ISIS, if we drive out all the people who are ethnic minorities and religious minorities, and we resettle them in places of which they will not return, and certainly if they come here, they will not return, then we are helping ISIS accomplish what they want, which is to create hegemony in that region. We need to relocate them in the region, and we need to have policies that protect them, which means no-fly zones. Back in 2011, I spoke to you, and I called for the United States to get involved in Syria with the rebels. And President Obama refused to do so. I called for support and protection. The reason we have a refugee crisis is because we haven't been protecting civilians who are barrel bombed by the Assad regime. We could stop that, but we don't. The president makes you feel bad not taking refugees, but he's created the refugee problem. America needs strong leadership. They need someone who's going to stand up and tell them the truth. In June of 2006, I told you I gave a speech at the National Press Club about naming the enemy. I will tell you what I did with that speech. 2 days later, I was at the White House, and I walked over to Tony Snow and President Bush, and I handed it to him. And I said, we have to stop pussyfooting around and tell the truth about the nature of our enemy. If we're going to defeat this enemy, we're going to rally the American public, trust you to know the truth, trust you to be able to deal with the truth, explain the difference between a Sunni and a Shiite. Most Americans have no idea No idea what these caliphates are. No idea what eschatology is in the Iranian side. I can tell you, having visited Israel, they know, because they know their lives depend on it. Here's the problem. So do ours, but our leaders don't treat it that way. You want a leader that's going to lead? Look at the record. Look at who's been with you. Look at who's had the courage to speak out and hand to the President of the United States a speech and say, this is a speech you must give. I've led, and I'm prepared to lead. At a time when our country is looking for a leader, I know you think, well, oh, look at all these folks out there and how well they're doing in the polls. Let me just share a little factoid with you. In the last Des Moines Register poll, 88% of voters said they were undecided. That doesn't mean they're not answering polls. They're answering polls, but they're undecided. In the last race in Iowa, 50% of the people who voted in the Iowa caucuses decided the last 3 days. You're dealing in shadows and illusions looking at these polls and determining who to support based on polls that mean nothing, except encouraging people, because they do well in the polls, to collect a lot more money than those of us who don't. The reality is, what matters is when the people of Iowa vote. And I have a lot of faith in the people of Iowa that they're going to vote for someone that they can trust, someone with experience at a time when our country's in trouble, someone with a record of getting things done. Oh, I know I'm known as a conservative, but did you know that I was the author of health savings accounts and pushed those through the United States Senate and Congress? Did you know not just the national security pieces, but I was a leader on a variety of other different issues. Yes, moral and cultural issues. Yes, national security issues. I was the president's sponsor of PEPFAR and the Global AIDS Bill and led that through the United States Senate, got conservatives to support it, worked in a bipartisan fashion on other important humanitarian issues. I worked on a variety of different tax issues, and of course the most important thing that I accomplished was I was the lead sponsor and author of welfare reform. Yes, the bill that did exactly what every candidate for Congress, or every candidate for the Senate, every candidate for president says who's a Republican. We need to take programs, we need to block grant them, send them to the states, we need to cap the amount of money, we need to require work and put time limits. I did that. And I did it with a Democratic president, and we got 70 votes in a Congress that only had 54 Republicans. How do you do that? You lead. You don't make every crusade about you. You make it about helping people, and you work with folks, and you listen, and you build relationships. I fought Barbara Boxer harder than probably any two people ever fought on the floor of the Senate on issues dealing with abortion. We were at each other's throats. But you know who my sponsor was for the Syrian bill? You know who my sponsor was for the Iranian bill? Barbara Boxer. How did that happen? Because you can disagree without being disagreeable. We're not going to go out and have coffee together, but we respect each other enough to work on things where we agree, and we don't let that get in the way of policy. You want someone who can get things done in Washington, who can win a state? How many blue state folks have you stood up here and won blue states as a conservative? And let's make no doubt about it, whoever the Republican nominee is, they're going to be tasked as the most conservative person ever to run. It doesn't matter who it is. How about having someone who's actually a conservative who's usually defending those positions in a state and winning it twice? In 2000, I was the only conservative to win a state that George Bush lost. I won Pennsylvania, and he lost. I've beaten Democratic incumbents not once, not twice, but 3 have retired or been defeated by me in 4 elections. I've won a 60%, a 70% district, Democratic district in a state with 1 million and 1.5 million more Republicans, Democrats and Republicans. And I got things done. Don't pay attention to the polls. Pay attention to your eyes and ears and minds and hearts. Do the right thing for the country. You want to lead? Is that what you're here to do, or are you here to follow? You're here to lead? Then lead. Find the person who is the right person to take this country's challenges on and make a difference in Washington, and then do something about it. I'd be happy to take your questions.
How you doing? Senator, you paint a very compelling narrative about how you would use American power abroad to affect the policies that we care about. The question I want to get your thoughts on is, how would you rally the American people behind this cause, especially an American people which right now seems to be war-weary and not really interested in a lot of adventurism internationally?
Back in 2006, when I was running for re-election, in a very bad election year, if you recall, I gave a series of speeches called The Gathering Storm of the 21st Century. And one of the things I believed in, and I believe even more so now, is if you tell the American public the truth about what we face, they know. They know. You look at the polls. The president calls it violent extremism. Everybody knows that's a joke. Americans know, but they really aren't informed. Our leaders are not being honest with them. They're not telling them the truth about the nature of the enemy. They want to know. They want to learn. And they will follow authenticity. They will follow the truth. I really do believe that the moment has come in America, and I think between now and Election Day, it will be even more obvious as the attacks ramp up. And I'm not predicting it because obviously it's a horrible thing. But this president is not going to do anything to stop these attacks. He's not. He's proven himself incapable of dealing with the reality. I mean, to stand there today and say, well, we're not sure if it's terrorism. The president is not going to deal with this, and that means when the next president comes in, it's going to be worse. And in this election cycle, this will be the big issue. And having someone who for, let's say 10 years has been out lecturing on college campuses all across the country, even around the world, about the nature of the threat, about who they are and why they want to kill us. And it's not because we support the state of Israel. It's because we stand for values that are antithetical to their values. It's because they believe in a fundamentally different God. That's why. And I hate to say that, but it's true. And the American public in their heart knows it's true. They're just waiting for a leader to tell them the truth. I think you will find that America will steal to this cause, just like we have before. We've had leaders who've had the courage to confront them and the enemy.
Can you talk for a moment about, as president, how you would balance? There's obviously a debate going on within our party now. The challenge between the balance between civil liberties and protecting our homeland.
Obviously, there are people here. I know there's someone speaking later. I know Senator Cruz, Senator Paul, both have taken the position that we need to weaken our national security and our ability to protect ourselves for privacy reasons. To me, privacy reasons that in the 10 years of the Patriot Act never bore out any instance of the invasion of privacy. I hear this all the time when I go out and talk to people. They say, well, you know, they're listening in on my phone calls. This has nothing to do with listening to anybody's phone call. This is metadata collection. People don't know what metadata is, so what do you have to do? You have to explain what metadata is. It's data about data. It's the information of who called, what number, and how long the call was. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about having recordings of people's phone calls. We're talking about having a searchable database that we can actually be able to determine if there's a network of calls or things going on in relationships of maybe people who we have identified who are spewing terror. And we now have lost that ability because of, in large part, two Republicans who are running for president. We have both of them who refuse to call Edward Snowden a traitor. The events in Paris, ladies and gentlemen, occurred because they were able to learn from Snowden how to not be detected in communicating. That's going to continue to be the case. I don't know what the definition of a traitor is if Edward Snowden isn't a traitor. Yet, we have Republican candidates who won't because of civil liberties. Here's the big problem that is going to occur as we have handcuffed our intelligence community's ability to be able to detect these communications. More of these horrific events are going to occur in the United States, and then there will be a call for a reduction in civil liberties. We had a situation where it was properly balanced and worked very hard on. And we have two Republican candidates, I hate to say, who led the charge to imbalance that to the detriment of the security of our country. So I would restore that balance and make sure that we have all the ability that we need. We are at war, and again, I go back to the fact that our presidents have not been clear in communicating to the American public the nature of this threat and why it is so real. I will do that, and we'll have the supports necessary to have the intelligence gathering capabilities to prevent these types of attacks.
Final last question. As you, in the fall, campaigning against Hillary Clinton, what do you see as her single biggest vulnerability?
Wow. It's a big list.
Top two, then.
Well, clearly she's running as the Secretary of State who put in the policies that have led to the collapse of the United States' influence in the world and a true train wreck when it comes to the security and stability of not just the Middle East, but now increasingly all over. Look at China and what it's doing with their islands, and you look at what's happening in Central and South America with Venezuela and Cuba. I mean, Cuba and Venezuela sponsor terrorism, help take control with the Bolivarian Revolution and overthrowing and maintaining Marxist governments in Central and South America. And our response is to reward Cuba. This is a policy that is, if you were someone who wanted to see the fall of America and you sat and you said, what can I do and still have a straight face, be able to say that this is actually good for America? What policies can I put forward that I could say are good for America, but I know are actually going to be destructive of our country? You would follow exactly what Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton have done. And so if the vulnerability, that's the biggest vulnerability at a time when that's going to be the biggest issue. And I don't want to be repetitive, but I will. We better have someone who's gone up against that juggernaut. My first race, I ran against the author of Hillary Care, and the campaign was run by James Carville and Paul Begala in a state with 1 million more Democrats and Republicans. I've been against the Clinton machine, and I've beaten them again and again. I've beaten them on the floor of the Senate. If you want someone who can win and who will lead this country in a way that will protect and keep us safe, I would appreciate your support. Thank you, and God bless.